The legacy of Mufasa as the noble and wise king of the Pride Lands is known by all, but few ask the question, who was Mufasa's father? And even fewer know the name Masego, the lion who ruled before him and whose fate remains shrouded in mystery. According to the story passed down by Mufasa's mother, Masego died in a sudden flood while trying to save his young son, a noble sacrifice. Or so it seems. The official tale describes a turbulent storm that led to flash floods across the savannah. As the water surged through the canyons, young Mufasa was caught in the current. Without hesitation, Masego leapt to save him. In the chaos, the two were separated. Mufasa survived. Masego vanished. His body was never recovered. No funeral was held. No monument was built. His name barely spoken in later years. But this version raises more questions than answers. Why did no one in the Pride Lands witness the aftermath? Why was his death accepted so quietly, even by the royal court? Why was there no royal mourning or traditional ceremony? And most importantly, why did Mufasa grow up knowing so little about the father who supposedly gave his life for him? There's an eerie silence surrounding Masego's end, not just in the kingdom, but in all of the Lion King's lore. While Mufasa is constantly reminded of his duty to the circle of life, and Simba is haunted by his father's death, Masego is merely forgotten. For a lion who ruled before Mufasa and shaped his early life, his absence is too strange to ignore. It's almost as if someone wanted the truth buried. Could it be that the story of the flood was a cover? A convenient tale to mask something more brutal, or more shameful? If Masego had truly died in an accident, the kingdom would have honored him as a hero. But without a body, without a farewell, without a legacy, something feels wrong. And this is where the mystery begins, because around the same time of Masego's disappearance, another force began to rise in the shadows of the savannah, one that may have been far more dangerous than a flood. As we examine the few surviving accounts of Masego's rule, one thing becomes clear. The past is full of contradictions. While Mufasa spoke often of the circle of life and the wisdom of his ancestors, he rarely mentioned his own father, except in vague references to duty and legacy. In the Pride Lands, tradition is everything. So why is Masego, a former king, treated more like a myth than a monarch? According to fragments of stories told by Sarabai and the older lionesses, Masego was not just a just ruler. He was a deeply respected leader, wise, patient, and brave. He was said to have led the kingdom through periods of drought and rising tensions with hyena clans. His presence was strong, his leadership firm but fair. Yet the historical silence is deafening. There is no clear timeline between Masego's death and Mufasa's coronation. Did Mufasa take the throne as a cub? Was there a regent? Did Rafiki, the ever-present shaman, witness the king's fall? None of this is explained. Even in the Lion Guard, which adds depth to the lore, Masego is absent from all ancestral guidance, while Mufasa continues to appear to Kion and Simba from the spirit realm. If Masego had passed peacefully and entered the realm of the great kings of the past, why has he never appeared? Here lies the first crack in the narrative. Mufasa's guidance as a spirit is consistent. Masego's is non-existent. This suggests something went wrong, not just with his death, but with his place in the ancestral plane. In the mythology of the Pride Lands, only the righteous kings are granted the right to return through the clouds, to speak with their descendants and guide them in times of need. If Masego had not been granted this honor, what happened? One possibility is that he died in a way that dishonored him, or worse, that he was killed by forces that interrupted his journey to the ancestral plane. Another possibility is that the truth of his death was intentionally concealed by those in power or by enemies who didn't want his legacy to survive. And just as this mystery deepens, a name begins to appear, one linked to destruction, exile, and violence. A lion whose presence marked the fall of other kingdoms. A lion whose ideology directly opposed everything Masego believed in. A lion named Kairos. In the distant memories passed down by Sarabai and other survivors of her homeland, one name strikes fear deeper than any hyena or rogue lion ever did: Kairos. Known as the White Lion, Kiros was not merely a wanderer or a brute. He was a visionary with a twisted philosophy, determined to reshape the circle of life into his own image of dominance and destruction. Kiros did not believe in balance. He believed in strength, raw, ruthless strength. In his view, nature did not need harmony. It needed conquest. He and his followers, a band of fierce lions and merciless outlanders, swept across regions, toppling small prides and dismantling any system built on peace or tradition. Sarabi once hinted that her original pride, the one she lived in before joining Mufasa, fell to Kiros's army. Their philosophy was simple: only the strongest deserve to rule. Mercy is weakness. Legacy means nothing. They weren't conquerors for territory. They were ideological crusaders, destroying the old ways to establish a new order. Now consider the timing. Kiros's rise coincides almost perfectly with the mysterious death of Masego. Multiple prides were overrun during this period. Sarabi herself became a refugee, eventually joining Mufasa in the Pride Lands. The trauma of this past was never fully explored, but it's there, hidden behind her regal demeanor. If Kiros had reached the borders of the Pride Lands during Masego's final days, it raises a terrifying possibility. Masego did not die in a flood. The flood was a cover, natural chaos that allowed enemies to strike. Perhaps the flood swept through the land, and in the panic, Kiros's group took advantage of the vulnerability. Imagine the scene: a weakened kingdom, a distracted ruler, a child in danger. Masego rushes to save his son, and never returns, not because of the water, but because Kiros was waiting. Even more chilling is the symbolic meaning of such an act. Killing Masego would not just destroy a king, it would break the chain of wisdom and ancestral connection, effectively silencing his voice in the clouds forever. This would explain why Mufasa never hears from his father, why no image of Masego ever appears, and why the elder lions speak of him only in whispers. If Kiros was behind this, it means he succeeded where Scar later failed, by striking at the very foundation of royal legacy. And yet, Kiros's story doesn't end there. His influence lingers, like a shadow waiting to rise again. If Masego's death was not an accident but an assassination by Kiros, the emotional and psychological impact on Mufasa becomes even more profound. As a cub, Mufasa believed his father died heroically, a noble sacrifice to save him from the flood. But if that belief was based on a lie, then his entire identity as a future king was built on incomplete truths. Mufasa grew up without a father figure to guide him. Unlike Simba, who later receives wisdom from the spirit realm, Mufasa never receives a message from Masego, not even once. This absence is striking. In a world where spiritual guidance plays a crucial role, Masego's silence raises questions. Could it be that his soul was never at peace? Or perhaps his death was so violent, so dishonorable in the eyes of the ancestors, that his spirit was unable to return to the circle of life? The trauma of losing his father likely influenced Mufasa's leadership style. He ruled with strength but also with immense compassion. He sought to uphold balance, protect the weak, and honor every part of the circle of life, possibly because deep down, he feared falling into the chaos that claimed his father. The legacy of Masego's mysterious death may have driven Mufasa to become the very opposite of Kiros, not a conqueror, but a guardian of balance. It also reframes Mufasa's relationship with Scar. Scar too grew up under the shadow of Masego's absence. But unlike Mufasa, Scar turned inward, letting bitterness and ambition consume him. If Masego was murdered and the truth hidden, then both brothers carried the weight of a silent war, one that shaped them in entirely different ways. Even Sarabi may have known more than she let on, having lived through the fall of her own pride and possibly witnessing the rise of Kairos firsthand. She may have feared the same fate for the Pride Lands. Her commitment to Mufasa, to order and peace, could have been rooted not just in love, but in survival. Ultimately, the loss of Masego didn't just create a vacancy on the throne. It created a legacy of silence, fear, and determination, passed down through Mufasa, then Simba, and even Kion. The question isn't just how Masego died, but how his absence changed the course of an entire kingdom. And in the shadows of that history, Kyros's influence may still linger. If Kyros truly orchestrated the death of Masego, his impact on the Pride Lands would extend far beyond a single event. His actions would have silently shaped the destiny of 3 generations: Mufasa, Simba, and even Kion. While the Pride Lands may have outwardly remained stable, the shadow of Kyros's ideology, power through fear, dominance without balance, would continue to haunt them. Kyros, unlike Scar, didn't seek the throne through manipulation within the family. He was an outsider, a warlord, a disruptor. His ideology rejected the circle of life and instead followed a path of conquest, where the strong ruled and the weak were discarded. This worldview, once unleashed, didn't vanish with his death. It may have influenced other enemies that arose later, like Zira, who inherited Scar's vision, or Makucha, who valued strength over harmony. Even after Kyros's fall, his spirit may not have left entirely. In the world of the Lion King, the spiritual realm often allows great kings to return and guide. But what of those who led through hatred? Scar's spirit returned through fire. Could Kyros's hatred have echoed through the darkness in subtler ways? We might already have seen the echoes of Kyros in the choices Scar made. If Scar and Mufasa grew up during Kyros's invasion, even if indirectly, Scar may have admired that power. While Mufasa clung to balance, Scar could have seen Kyros as a symbol of liberation from tradition, someone who defied the rules and took what he believed was his. That admiration could explain Scar's later alliance with the hyenas, his disregard for the circle of life, and his hunger for domination. But perhaps the most chilling legacy of Kyros is this: he proved that kings can fall, not to time or disease, but to targeted violence. That knowledge may have lingered in every royal decision thereafter. It may have driven Simba to be more protective, more fearful, more hesitant to let go of power. It may have driven Kion to seek peace far from the throne, not out of cowardice but to avoid becoming the next target in a silent war that began long ago. Kyros never ruled the Pride Lands, but if he killed Masego, his influence outlived his own reign, haunting the kingdom through trauma, secrecy, and fear. And even if his name was erased from history, his shadow may still be waiting for a moment to rise again. In the grand tapestry of the Pride Lands' history, Masego's death has always been presented as a tragedy of nature. A noble king swept away while saving his son. But if the theory is true and his death was not an accident but an assassination, it changes everything. It exposes a buried chapter of royal trauma, one that rewrites the origins of both heroism and villainy in The Lion King. Why would such a truth be hidden? Perhaps to protect the kingdom's stability. Perhaps to preserve Mufasa's memory of his father as a selfless hero, rather than a victim of brutal betrayal. If Mufasa had grown up knowing that his father was murdered, his path as king might have turned toward vengeance rather than balance. He might have led with suspicion rather than wisdom. The legacy of harmony would have been replaced by fear and retaliation. And what of Scar? If he witnessed Kyros's rise and fall, or secretly aligned with his philosophy, then Scar's betrayal wasn't born from jealousy alone, but from a long-standing resentment against a system that denied him power. The seeds of Scar's ideology may have been planted by Kyros, watered by grief, and brought to life through a desire to finish what that white lion started. Even Simba's reign, long considered the return of rightful leadership, is tainted by this theory. His fear of losing what was rebuilt may stem not just from losing his father, but from inheriting a throne haunted by hidden enemies. And Kion, always struggling between power and peace, may have unknowingly carried the weight of that past every time he used the roar. But if the truth were to emerge, if the Pride Lands discovered that Kyros, not nature, ended Masego's life, what would it mean for the future? Would it trigger a new conflict, seeking justice after generations? Or would it offer closure, allowing the kingdom to finally confront its oldest fear? Perhaps this truth was meant to stay buried. Perhaps it was the silence that kept peace alive. But secrets have a way of rising, just like the sun over the savannah. And now, the Pride Lands may face a choice: cling to the myth of a noble death, or accept the chilling possibility that their legacy began with a murder, one that still echoes through every roar every crown, and every king. Do you believe Masego was killed by Kiros? Should the truth, if discovered, be shared or kept hidden to protect the kingdom? Could the future of the Pride Lands depend on finally facing the past?